Professor Jeff Miley from Cambridge University. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Professor. So I would like to start with the liberal democracy, first of all. So the traditional nation-state model continues to generate structural crises, inequalities, and identity conflicts across the world, as you know, and also as you do a lot of research about that. In your work, you have also examined non-state radical democratic models, such as democratic confederalism. In your view, for which fundamental deadlocks of liberal democracy do these models offer a structural antidote?
For many of the problems of liberal democracy, for the most part as well, there's a lot of ignorance in the liberal democracies, and that's because people are not accustomed to actually governing themselves. They're very alienated from their government, and so I think one of the real advantages and virtues of the democratic confederal model of direct democracy is that it's a participatory democratic model in which people participate and cultivate and can therefore cultivate the virtues of citizenship. So the crisis of citizenship is one thing, and the alienation of the citizens is one thing as well. Given democratic confederalism sustains the sovereignty of the municipality, and in so doing, that takes away the oligarchic control over democratic processes that big corporations have. At least in principle, it can do so. And so I think it could also very much address the problems associated with economic inequality in really existing democracies. And then it also, because of the empowerment of the citizenry, it could make it so that the unaccountable oligarchies and cliques that control the foreign policy establishment are brought into account and have to take account vis-a-vis the democratic citizenry. So I think on all of those fronts, a direct democratic model like the democratic confederal model could provide vast improvements from the liberal democratic status quo.
Thank you, Professor. Secondly, amid the global capitalist market mechanisms and economic embargoes, how do you evaluate the efforts of such alternative models to build self-sufficient communal economies? This is very important wording for us as well, the communal economies. So to what extent can a politically stateless model resist the pressures of the global financial system on an economical level?
That's a really good question. I mean, the experiment in Rojava was much more developed with respect to the level of radical democracy, with respect to gender emancipation. Its economic dimension of revolution remained comparatively underdeveloped compared to these other dimensions of revolution. Alongside the ecological life also remained more aspirational. And I think part of this had to do with the exigencies of a wartime economy. But I think the statelessness question is an interesting question to pose vis-a-vis the ability to construct a radical alternative without the state, a radical economic alternative. I do believe that a flourishing of communes and cooperatives could very much help push in that direction, and there's no reason why that can't be developed. But I think it's difficult to do in wartime situations, and there's reasons to believe that the democratic confederal experiment only came about because there was a war and there was a breakdown of state authority. And I want to talk some more about that in subsequent questions.
Thank you so much. So, as you also mentioned the importance about the Rojava, on the other hand, just as an extra question, I would like to ask about the Öcalan's democratic communal society establishment. So, how would you like to evaluate that? What do you think Öcalan is trying to tell to Kurds? Because he also opened a new page on the struggle for the Kurds to be existed in a constitutional way in Turkey as well. But on the other hand, with his manifest that he published, he is also underlining the importance of the communal living. So how do you understand that, and how should the Kurds understand this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's right that from the bottom up has to start with communal living and the communal question, the communes, and I think for that to go hand in hand with a process of disarmament for the PKK and a sort of integration of cadres from the PKK into a political process and civil society from the bottom up, it would be through the construction of communes, and I think that part of the issue with in Rojava, which it shed so much light on what the alternative of radical direct democracy could look like, but it was always having to exist in wartime conditions, and that was very difficult created very difficult many difficulties for pushing forward the revolutionary restructuring of society. And I think in conditions of peace, which is the real gamble that Öcalan is pushing for, that we could establish peace and civil society freedoms, that the communal society can be built from the bottom up.
Thank you, Professor. I'm really sorry, but I have to ask and add on one more question as well. You also mentioned about the democratic integration. So, how should we understand the democratic integration? As a researcher, how does it sound to you from Britain, and how can the Kurds establish this democratic integration?
Yeah, I mean, I come from California. The United States has all sorts of debates in the Black radical movement about the question of integration, whether or not integration is desirable, or a nationalist alternative is more desirable for the African American population. So the language is sort of not the sweetest language to my ears. Nonetheless, I can see it as a step which can avoid annihilation. And there was a real danger of annihilation of Kurds in the northeast of Syria, of Kurds also in Turkey, of Kurds in Iran. A real danger of annihilation. And the democratic integration process is part of a peace process. It's the first step that allows for creating the political space for the creation from the bottom up of more maximalist alternatives like democratic communalism, democratic confederalism, what have you.
Thank you. So we can follow our questions drafted once. So within the Western left and academic circles, we often see both deep administrations and at times and distance romanticization as well. So towards these local self-governance models, in your opinion, are the Western intellectuals and left-wing movements capable of the building genuine and realistic solidarity with these practical experiences, or do they merely aesthetize them within their own theoretical frameworks? Do you think they are stuck in one frame with the same vision for last decade?
It's a good question. I guess there's been a lot of people who have come and expressed some sort of solidarity, had some sort of inspiration in the Kurdish movement since the Rojava experiment, the Rojava revolution. So it really depends on who you have in mind. I do think that there have been really good examples of internationalism. I was on when I first became familiar with Kurdish politics, was on a academic delegation to Rojava in December of 2014, and David Graeber was on that delegation with me, and I think he had a genuine interest in what was happening there, thinking if there was a revolution in real time, and trying to think through the difficulties of revolutionary politics through a real revolution. But nevertheless, Janet Biel was there as well. We were definitely all somehow enamored by the idea of there being a real revolution. And so there was some kind of romanticization, I think. But I don't think it stopped us from being able to have a critical perspective and to have some critical solidarity. I do think critical solidarity is a real difficult task to have. So either you have people who are kind of, as you say, romanticizers, or people who speak and cynically and dismiss without thinking through the real problems. But having a position of critical solidarity is a real difficulty for anybody anywhere, but particularly people from the global north trying to have a solidarity with the revolutionary process somewhere in the global south. I think it requires decolonial sensitivities.
Thank you, Professor. We should also talk about the practical lessons. So what the practical lessons does this kind of local model emerging from a conflict-ridden geography such as Middle East hold for the rest of the world, particularly for social movements in the West in an age marked by climate crisis and rising authoritarianism? Could these local experiences inspire a new political wave on a global scale? So also you can relate this question with the Öcalan's internationalist paradigms as well.
Yeah, I think that the Kurdish movement has played a very important role in reigniting revolutionary imagination among social movements in the West, particularly on the anarchist flank, but more generally, there is a lot of interest in as we were saying, curiosity about this revolutionary process taking place. And I think that in the diffusion of Öcalan's ideas, and through Öcalan's ideas, people also came to discover again Murray Bookchin and his ideas, these ideas that libertarian socialist ideas, libertarian municipalist ideas, democratic confederalist ideas started taking root a little bit more. People started understanding that this alternative does exist. And not only in Western social movements, but I've spent a lot of time in Kenya, in the informal settlements of Nairobi, and their ideas of democratic confederalism have been taken up with great interest, with great passion, not always uncontroversially, but it has really much sparked understanding in the movement that there are certain possibilities. And I think, in fact, the social movements in the Western countries have been strengthened by the example, thinking about this real life example of Rojava, and also by the organic networks that they have created with the Kurdish movement. But I think that the Kurdish movement stands to be even more influential in parts of the world where, again, the state is weak.
Also, we need to talk about the peace process as it's on the agenda and top of the news last 2 years since the leader Öcalan's call for peace and democracy. So the peace process still continuing in Turkey. What is your call to the Turkish state regarding taking concrete steps and ensuring leader Öcalan's freedom?
Öcalan's freedom is crucial for there to be real negotiations of a peace process. So too does there have to be real legal commitments to the democratic integration of people who are part of the PKK, who want to be part of a peaceful political movement in civil society. I think that constitutional recognitions would also be very good with respect to Kurdish identity and Kurdish language. But I think right now what we really want to secure are the conditions of peaceful democratic integration of the guerrilla into civil society.
Thank you. So also just to underline and make it more clear, what is the significance of leader Öcalan's freedom and why he should be free, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he is the leader of an inspiration of millions and millions of Kurdish people, who has articulated a vision of self-determination, which is a world historical re-articulation of self-determination, so that it does not mean the consecution of a nation state, the achievement of a nation state, but rather means radical direct democracy, something from below. And a kind of non-state paradigm. So I think he's a world historical figure, but he's also a figure like Nelson Mandela, who has the authority and legitimacy in the movement to push for and to guarantee peace.
Thank you, Professor. Lastly, shortly, anything I didn't ask, anything you would like to add on for the peace process or for our frame of our interview? Please have your last words.
Well, I mean, the only thing that I would like to say, would like to stress very much, is that I think it's very important for the movement to think creatively and to think ambitiously with respect to the scope of democratic and federal ideals, how appealing they are around the world. Particularly, as I say, I spend a lot of time in Nairobi, and in Nairobi they've been taken up with great passion. And I think elsewhere across Africa, there's a lot of space for a discussion about democratic confederalism, and not only in Africa, anywhere and everywhere where the state is undergoing serious stresses and threats. That creates opportunities for people to take matters into their own hands and to create a self-determining, radical, direct democratic confederal alternative. I think some kind of orientation it would be great. The Kurdish movement has great experience, and I think it can position itself at the vanguard of the movement for freedom around the world.
Thank you so much, Professor Jeff Miley from Cambridge University. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your valuable comments.
Yeah, thank you.